All right, we are back, and we are back early,
Oh,
Professor Beth Egan.
bleary-eyed.
Yeah, of course, the news came out, I don't want to say late last night, but certainly placed in timing that kind of threw everybody off. What was it, about 6 p.m. East
Yeah.
Coast time? I think that the news hit. We have our first of two remedies which have come in. Obviously, for the anticlimactic part of this is everything will be appealed,
Yeah.
and this will continue to go on for 5, probably 6 more years, and who knows where it goes from there. But nonetheless, we have our first ruling. A lot of the content, anybody who's been following us would know that we've really dug in pretty deep here with both cases. We've almost kind of merged them, and now we're coming out and we're getting into the remedy phase. Neither of us had the time to read all 200 plus pages of the ruling.
But I will. I can't wait.
Yeah, I think we both will. I'm definitely going to sit down but I did absorb 3 or 4 articles, maybe a couple little news breaks. How did you get the news?
I got a breaking alert. Shame on me. I don't remember the source. Isn't this part of the problem that the publishers aren't getting the revenue? Um, yeah, I got the alert late, and then, like you, started digging into. I have all my go-to sort of spots that I've been using to follow this all along. Um, but I do. My favorite part of all of this is digging into the actual ruling. Um,
Right.
and I was kind of laughing at myself. So semester started. I have a no laptop rule in my class, and I talk a lot about all the research I've done and how important it is to write things down in terms of really digesting and memorizing them. So here I've got the ruling up on Acrobat. I could have thrown it into ChatGPT and asked it to summarize, or I could have done the highlights, but I'm sitting here with my pen and paper, writing the whole thing out to really just try to absorb.
Yeah.
The big news was no divestiture of Chrome, which we've talked about on this show
Let
before. I
yeah, let's let
always thought that was a weird sort of.
yeah, let's start there. Let's start there. So obviously, was it now 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, Perplexity makes an unsolicited bid for Chrome. My conjecture was they were either trying to force this change. Like, I know that they didn't think that they were
Mhm,
going to get a yes on that at that price, but I think it was done so that potentially people would think, oh, okay, this is going to happen, this needs to happen.
mhm,
They, of course, ignore, it gets ignored. Nobody else makes any bid noise. We don't hear anything. There's no rattling, nothing like that. And then we obviously get to where we are now, and we see that Chrome is going to remain intact and inside of Google.
mhm.
Um, what was your reaction to this?
I mean, like I said, I was always that always sort of caused me to pause. Like, what was the end game with that remedy? Anyone who would have bought it, and to your point, like Perplexity was such a low bid that it
Yeah.
just the whole
Oh,
thing seemed performative to
yeah.
me. Maybe it was a publicity stunt to get Perplexity's name out there to a broader audience. Um, because the value of Chrome is what it brings to the search ads business.
Right.
So you're not going to buy it unless you're going to do something very much like what Google did with it. So I was really happy to see that the judge more or less came to the same conclusion. I haven't read the rationale on that yet. Um, the thing that I think is also curious is, so no divestiture of Chrome.
Hmm.
Okay, makes sense. Who else is going to buy it? What are they going to do with it? Um, but then this really sort of nod to, but you have to share your search index
Yeah. I
information.
mean, really, I mean, again, haven't read every word of this, but obviously some people have read sections of it and reported on this. New York Times, our Adtech properties like Ad Exchanger and everybody else has kind of gone through it. Seems like this is fair to say nebulous. We're not exactly sure how this is going to work.
Well, we're absolutely not sure how it's going to work. I did kind of go in. So for anyone listening who does not know what a search index is, according to the ruling, the definition is a database of publicly available web pages
Yeah.
that can be returned to a user query. So basically, all that means is it's the think Rolodex for our older listeners
Yeah.
of all the web pages that Google goes to look at when you type in "Where do I buy a winter jacket?" But then when you dig into, because it wasn't the complete search index, the articles kept referencing these limitations. There are 3 pieces of information that are identified in the ruling. And then within the third piece of information, which is a document ID, essentially, there's another 6 specific pieces of information that Google must share. The 7th is anything else the technical committee decides to add to that.
Yeah, I saw that.
So it
Yeah.
just feels like a data dump to sound like we're penalizing Google, but if I'm on the receiving end of that, how useful is that information going to be for me?
Well, we didn't get any names, right? Which would be the information that would make this kind of a little bit more crystallized, right? Where you go, okay, so Microsoft is getting it. Let's say Yahoo gets it. Let's say a couple other players would be getting this data direct. When do they get it? Is it real time? Do they get it every
It's not real time. It's
right?
periodically.
Exactly. So
And they still have to pay for it. A marginal
yeah,
cost. I don't know
right.
what that
There's going to be
means.
some type of cost of collected data.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it has to be stored somewhere and then shipped over,
So what
whatever.
I would imagine anyone who's willing to pay for it can get it.
Yeah. So this then turns into who's getting the data. Now, the only thing that I keep going back to and having the guests that we've had on kind of forced me to go look back at Microsoft and
Mhm.
similarly the reaction, and we're not even 24 hours from where we are, and I would love to get a couple of our guests back, Chris and Karina, to kind of give us a after we all digest the ruling, come back in and say, okay, here's where the situation is, and we get Andrew back, obviously, because he
Mhm.
was very interested in where Apple was going to play out with this, right? Which would have been a pretty big stone, right? If they
Yeah.
had eliminated that okay, so between Chrome and Apple, those are the 2 big hits, right? Those are the 2 hits. Neither of those are included here.
Mhm.
So in the Microsoft ruling at the time, a lot of people felt like the ruling was soft. But in the end, it took some time, a few years. Microsoft ultimately was neutered in the space and this, quite frankly, allowed Google to step in.
Yeah.
So, the Microsoft ruling over time. Now, I am struggling with just again, a very well done New York Times article and a couple of other things. I'm struggling to see where this is going to change the trajectory of Google in its massive control of search. The only thing that I did read that Judge Mehta, jumped in here on, and I think it's an interesting timeline, is this case starts in 2020.
Mhm.
You remember January 2023.
Mhm.
Um, things cease to be algorithms and they become AI, and
Mhm.
particularly in our space, right? Where we had algorithms for years or AI, and now we're able to talk about it.
Mhm.
And he cites actually in this ruling, like that did change. So you and we've talked about this.
Mhm.
That definitely changed something here. I don't know if
Mhm.
it would be the Apple component or the Chrome component, that the payments or the Chrome itself. But I have a funny feeling that if that explosion hadn't happened, um, we would be seeing something different. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting harder and harder for the DOJ to dig into their position of this Google monopoly, and their manipulation of the system. I'm not saying it didn't happen in the past.
Yeah.
Um, and, Meta actually made a comment about, usually in antitrust cases, you're looking at past. In this one, I have to look into a crystal ball, which, as he stated, is not a judge's forte. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I think that's definitely coming into play because look, you're gonna knock the biggest player off at its knees, and then the whole world changes. And this has always been my question, what takes its place?
Yeah.
And I know we'll have people on who will argue with me on that and I look forward to that. But I've said time and time again, part of Google's monopoly, part of, not all, but
Yeah.
part of Google's monopoly came from building a better mousetrap. And we can unplug that if we want. But where does that leave us as users? And one of the other articles that I came across, I'm just going to pop this up real quick because I thought it was an
Hmm.
interesting point. They referenced this professor from UPenn, Herbert Hoovenkamp. Apparently was referenced about 30 times in the ruling. And the author's point on this is, and I went to Perplexity to get a
Hmm.
little summary of this, but this Hovenkamp, I guess that's how to pronounce his name,
Hmm.
thinks that antitrust law should primarily focus on the competitive process and the welfare of consumers. So the author's point was, with Meta relying on that guy, he's also sort of thinking about it from the user perspective. And I think that's where the DOJ is sometimes getting themselves a little twisted up. Yes, they're monopolistic practices. Yes, this should be looked at, and I hate to use the R word, regulated.
Yeah.
Um, but the flip side of that is we are all beneficiaries of this ecosystem. And if we break it, we own it.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the biggest factor, right? Is you tear, you know, Google up by the roots here, and what shakes back out. I can just tell you, I'm obviously still working in the industry. Um, Pulled some data just recently for a couple of clients, and did notice. I'm just going to say this very interesting. I think this is interesting. I was going to share this with you either way. Just happens that I get to share it with you now. Is these are smaller franchise type operations who rely heavily on PPC search and everything else. And ChatGPT is in the game. 1 to 2% of searches, right, end up through the chat. Now the other brands weren't there, the other LMMs aren't there, but maybe that's where he did look and say, well, between the idea that the consumer would suffer and then this new competition clearly on the rise because it's gone from 0 to a couple of points, which is not insignificant. Just, for any listener who's not
Mhm.
aware, I want to say Bing at its height was maybe 5%.
Right, right.
So
Maybe.
2% and doing no,
You round it up.
ChatGPT. Yeah, right. And
Yeah,
and I think that the ChatGPT is going to jump in here. I think we're going to see that move up very quickly by even this time next year. I suspect it'll be closer to 5 to 10%, which
yeah,
which will be significant. But
yeah,
overall, I think that what we saw or what we've seen so far, and obviously we haven't read everything, and we do need to understand. I think that we have to wait to kind of understand from somebody who's going to be receiving or eligible to get this data, what does that really mean for them?
yeah,
Right. So in other
right.
words, if it is ChatGPT, if it is Microsoft, if it, these are competitive products, all of this information, the only analogy I could kind of come up with would be like, an aisle in a grocery store, when grocery stores, and they still do, right? I mean, product placement is everything, right? And those search
Mhm.
results, you want to be in the first page, you want to be, 2, 3 lines down, that's it. Well, in the cookie aisle, you'll
Mhm.
notice that Nabisco, Oreo, all of the, and there might be a better cookie on the bottom shelf or on the upper right-hand corner of the shelf, but nobody would know, right? Like
That's
who
right.
knows? So in this particular case, we're looking at, would the competitors now be able to kind of say, okay, now we know this data for sure. I thought of it in the following way. I find it hard to believe that the competitors, even though they might be hundreds of times smaller, still don't know. I don't know what they're going to actually learn from this data, but again, it's not I'm not a data scientist, as you know. I sell this technology, but I mean, it will be very interesting to see where that remedy, ends up being a component of this.
Yeah, and it's not real time from my reading of it, it's
Right,
not
it's
real
not real
time
time.
data.
Right.
So,
That was mentioned in the 3 articles that I read, that it was not gonna be real time, or at least that was
yeah,
the
and
idea.
I'm not a data scientist, let's be very clear.
Yeah,
But I have worked with large amounts of data. I've gotten these data dumps from ComScore, from the trade desk.
right.
And it's not like you get the information and all of a sudden the light goes on and you're like, "Oh my god, I never realized this before." It it's a lot of work. So, and again, I'm not a programmer, so, maybe we bring one on and talk to them about it. But I just don't see how getting this information dumped on you from Google at a cost on a periodic basis is a better business model than building your own index and crawlers. It's 2025, that can't be that hard to do. So building your own and getting the information in real time. But something else that you said that kind of sparked something that I think is intriguing in how, like, I just felt like Meta was really tiptoeing around a lot of these things. So, two things. I encourage all our listeners, go and read the DOJ press release on this ruling. It is a brilliant piece of spin. I'm definitely sharing it with my public relations colleagues
Yeah.
as a great case study. So look at how the DOJ has kind of spun this as a win. But I also think, for better or for worse, Brinkema and Meta are kind of, and Brinkema is the judge
Yeah.
in the ad
Adtech.
network
Yeah,
monopoly
Adtech, yeah.
case. Um, I think these remedies would have been different had not that case also be sitting out there. So Meta coming in with the remedies before Brinkema, I almost feel like he kind of sat back and said, "Okay, I'm in this little search bubble. Um, I'm gonna let Brinkema deal with the other pieces of this."
Oh, really? You think that one, see, I looked at it as this was the bigger case. Did you are you don't see it that way?
It's not that I don't see it as the bigger case, but I think the DOJ muddied the waters.
Oh, maybe having them go simultaneously was not the best idea.
Yeah, in
I see.
hindsight.
Well, what I mean, the CEO founder of DuckDuckGo, obviously was prepared for the worst, and his comments were kind of like, "Meh, this is exactly what we thought."
Yeah.
And so I think it is a little bit of a kick the can, and I don't think that Meta Judge Meta meant to do that. I think that there's a salient point, at least in I think the New York Times quoted him as saying, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have a crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't have a crystal ball.
Right.
So, you don't want to tip the scales one direction or the other, not to mention that Google is a behemoth, in terms of, keeping this thing going, and the money that they're investing and reinvesting, Chrome as an island, or even what we're going to talk about in the Brinkema case, where, we're talking about pulling out what would be the remnants of Dart for Publishers, DFP, who's
Mhm.
going to maintain it, right? And I think Chris Grimm did a great job, and Karina did a great job of we discussed the fact that what you can do, have News Corp buy it, or
Right.
have somebody, who's gonna maintain it, who's gonna keep it cutting edge, who's gonna make sure that it works with the next product that comes out, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's where somebody like Google becomes very important to this, and I think that might have really been a bigger factor. That if you throw that in along with the fact that Google is facing competition in AI, right?
Yeah.
Across the board in AI, not just
Yeah.
LLMs, but across the board. Maybe that's where we got this kind of, I don't know. I feel like it's a little unsatisfying. Like maybe we wanted a little bit more. I'm not suggesting that I wanted, I came into this podcast, idea with you like really anti Google and kind of like softening very rapidly on the idea like, oh yeah, but see, once you take a part of Google away, who's picking it up?
Right.
And I
Right.
guess maybe the idea is that ChatGPT would pick it up, or Perplexity would pick it up, right? By the idea that they're throwing out like, hey, we'll buy Chrome,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a low drama ruling, I
Yeah.
feel like. And yeah, I'm as excited as ever for Judge Brinkema's ruling. As we've talked about before, I think she did an amazing job of really doing her homework and understanding the business models, really digging into what actually is happening behind the scenes. And I, I think her ruling, vis-a-vis what's been set up here, is just going to be fascinating. And my prediction is it will be equally low drama.
I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit more drama, and I'm going to give you my over at dinner with people who are not involved after discussing the podcast.
Well, Craig, this would be no fun if we ever agreed.
Yeah,
So bring
I
it.
don't. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't. Here's my thought on this is a number one in the search side of this. Google, from I mean, I again not knowing everything, which I don't. They built their search business, right? They're kind of hand hewn their own search world. They beat the rivals, the Yahoos and everybody else in the space. There's much more of a monopolistic kind of containment in the ad tech side of the case. Google has a tremendous amount of power and money. We've detailed obviously search and Gmail and YouTube and everything else that's going on here. Google reads the tea leaves like everybody else, but Google has the money to buy end-to-end solution here, right? Real true monopoly. Like we're not letting it, we're keeping our elbows sharp. We're making sure nobody gets in. That might be is where I think that, because I thought, it's particularly after we had that conversation with Andrew, I was thinking, maybe search will not be a huge, mess. They're not going to tear it apart. But ad tech seems like they really did play a role as being monopolist. So, it's kind of like, Vanderbilt going from, being on the water in New York Harbor and then deciding I'm going to dominate railroads and every version of transit, right? I'm going to own the whole thing. So I think that's where I'm kind of coming at this, where I do think she's, Judge Brinkema is also going to kind of dig into that a little bit. And I'm curious, I have no idea, we've talked about, do they force them to get out of the DSP business more or less? Do they get the ad server out of there? Like what's next?
Yeah, for me, the bigger issue in the ad tech case is the issue of price discovery. So I think
So you
making
mean you mean transparency? Like
yes.
like you mean like
So
Google
price
has to share, yeah,
yeah, price discovery in a
in real
market,
time.
in
In
a
real time
capitalistic
though.
market. Yeah, in a
Yeah.
capitalistic market, the market works when you have full transparency of what the various price differential is.
Yeah.
So to me, that price fixing, if you want to it's probably not legally price fixing, but that price fixing piece is what troubles me the most in the Adtech case. I mean, that is full on, I'm just shoving my competitors out of the way, and
Yeah, it
there's
feels like an
nothing.
elbow. Yeah, elbow.
Yeah,
It's a total elbow out. You're
yeah.
not
The
getting in
the
here.
the problem I have with what happens if they try to break apart a piece, which I agree with you. I think there's a high probability that something gets ripped out of it. But the problem that I have with it is, how is that really any different than what Meta, Facebook Meta,
Yeah.
is doing? And I know that tech guys will tell me exactly how it's different, but is it, as an
I don't.
advertiser,
Well, they're up there in their
I'm
own.
getting the same obsequiousness from Meta that I'm getting from Google, and arguably from Amazon as well. So then do you have to go, then what happens to the competitors who are kind of doing the same thing? So that's where I think, if I were Judge Brinkema, I would be very cautious about how whatever I apply to Google applies to the other competitors.
Well, they're all in. I mean, Meta's in a court, in a battle as well. Which, I mean, I don't think it's going to materialize by the end of this year, but it'll be next year for
Mhm.
sure. For sure. Amazon also, right? And Amazon has thrust into this category with some fervor, right? Like really not taking a big swipe at the trade desk, who
Mhm.
I would argue was kind of being propped up by Google, right? Like, hey, here's our competitor. See,
Mhm.
they're big, but Amazon came in and swept them, swept everybody off the table except for Google in a matter of, it feels like months. I know it's
Yeah.
been years, but it
Yeah.
feels like months. It
Yeah.
really does. Like it went from like, oh, Amazon's cute, they have their own DSP. Now all of a sudden they're the second biggest, right? So
Mhm.
it's almost an instantaneous thing. In the case of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, not our judge Meta,
Mhm.
um, I mean, we're looking at, there's other, there's other cases going on simultaneously, and I suspect that Facebook will be fined. Like that's really how that kind of is going to end up being the remedy there, because they're not open web, right? They're not the complete open web. So I think that when you're looking at Google and you have publishers like Jim Spanfeller, who I would really recommend from my former boss. He's very outspoken. He's got some great posts. So you go check him out. The publishers in the world of Google have really been hammered away. Not that Facebook has done publishers any favors, but at
Right.
least they're in their own ecosystem and they're kind of kept, you can stay away from Facebook. I think it's very hard to stay away from Google.
But it goes back to defining the problem.
Yeah.
And if the problem is defined as this end-to-end price fixing, that's happening in all of these places. If you define the problem
Yeah, which is
as
what
Google
yeah,
owning the open
that
web, then that's a different
yeah, but
problem.
well, again, the open web being that, in the case of Facebook, I mean, Facebook to God, man, I hate defending Facebook, but here I am. They really got out of the publishing. They stopped that kind of rampant news feed posting. And I don't know if they did it for good or bad. I have no idea. They changed the
That's another
algorithms
podcast.
several times, right? But they don't really rely on that, right? They rely basically on Instagram and content being flooded in. Now, of course, they are definitely not transparent in what they're earning out of it, but they are transparent in what you pay. So they don't show you the margin that they're getting, right? You can see that if you want to sift through their corporate
But you know
profits,
what
and
you pay on Google too.
yeah, but Google is paying the publisher, right? In other words,
Well,
like you're creating the content.
that's why Facebook got out of the publisher, because
Yeah,
the publishers were coming down on them and wanting them to pay, and they just said, "Screw it, we're just not going
yeah,
to
we
do this."
don't need you
So
anyway, right?
again, they didn't do that altruistically. They didn't
No.
say, "Hey, we're owning this whole thing. We
Oh
got to
no,
get out of this."
yeah,
No.
no, I totally understand it. Being a publisher who had to deal with that myself in 2017, That was
Yeah.
not a pleasant 2014 and 2017 where algorithm changes and the way that they were doing the news feed, and suddenly you were in the feed, then you're out of the feed, then people have to
Yeah.
subscribe to you, whatever. But I don't know whether or not Facebook is, and it's not as big a player, right? We know Google is the biggest still. And I think that it's the most sensitive. And I think that's where the ad tech conversation is going to, the open web is suffering, right?
Well,
We're
so
losing free information. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that they're not as big. That was actually the point being made about the ruling relying on this Professor Hovenkamp, is because that's exactly the point that he's making, is that you can't make these antitrust decisions based on the size of the company. They need to be made on, the impact to the consumer. Um, and so that's my point, is whatever Brinkema rules in the Google case will have an impact on future rulings in any of these other ad tech cases. So I think she has to be very mindful. She can't just go after Google because they're big. Well, she can, but
Right.
the argument would be you don't go after Google just because they're big. You go after Google because we are establishing that this business model is monopolistic. And
And
so,
bad for the consumer. I mean
and bad for the, yeah.
yeah, I mean that's the bottom line is like we just said, you're in the shopping aisle at the supermarket and all you see are Oreos and Chips Ahoy from Nabisco and you can't find anything else. Are you is it the consumer's fault, or did Nabisco come in and say we want all that space and we're going to pay for it, right? Because we have the money. Well, the same principle here, right? Is how many, I mean, seriously, this is the truth, and I see it all the time in client meetings of it. How far down in the search engine do you go? 2 pages?
Not
2 pages? Not even. Well, I'm glad you said it, but like I'm so lazy now that I go first page. If I don't see what I'm looking for, I go and I search. I change the search terms, and I come back in again. I don't even go to the second or third or fourth page like I used to. So I think, and that obviously depends on what you're looking for, but and how urgent. If you got a leak in your ceiling or your car is broken, you'll go a little further. But for basic knowledge, you're just going to reset the search and keep looking until you get to that first page. So my thought on this is very simple. I think that on the search side of this, the more I think about it, the more Meta had a really difficult job to do here. My thought on the Brinkema side of this is, as a consumer and the publishers, because it's really a publisher case, right, who serve the consumer, they're being destroyed. We're and I want to do another podcast, and people like Simon and stuff like that, where we're talking about this. Go to CNN, go to these places. They're subscriber only, subscriber only, subscriber only. It's all walling up. It's all walling up because they cannot make it work, right, with the pressure on them in terms of what does it cost to get a writer, somebody to edit, somebody to art it, all these different things, photography, all this stuff. So I think that unless you want a world of everything made in AI and everything unvetted, which is apparently what the internet is, right, the overall, but the conversation needs to be had. And I think that that's where this will, I'm curious to see if it's going to be the ad serving side. I have a feeling it will be, because I don't think you could take away the supply from Google, but I do think you could say, okay, this has to go, and we got to figure out somebody else to buy it. But all right, it is 9 a.m. in the East Coast. We've done I don't know, a yeoman's job here. I think that we spend a few days, we'll get some guests, we will put together some deeper dives. I'm going to do as much reading as I can of the ruling and hope that, Brinkema doesn't land another 200 pages on my lap. But this was great, Beth. We have our first now we get to see the remedy kind of come out and see where it's going to end up. But any final thoughts?
No, I'm really looking forward to the Brinkema ruling now. Can't wait.
All right, now I'll get you a spam T-shirt. I know you commented on that earlier, so we'll take care of that.
Love these early morning ones.
Yep. Ciao. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.